All right. Hello and welcome to this episode of the OCD and Anxiety Show, where we are going to talk about giving meaning to our thoughts and feelings and how that's one of the first things we do that really starts off this whole loop. So, real quick, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty, and I'm the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And real quick before we dive in, we would really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing, as well as leaving a comment or review. If you are a listener on iTunes or Spotify, it would really be helpful if you leave a review there as well. And then also, if you're looking for help with OCD and anxiety, please check out the resources that we have right in the notes. We have a book as well as a workshop to get started with. And you can also fill out an application if you're looking to work with us over at Restored Minds in our program, Taking Back Control. So this episode is inspired from a question that I received. And so I wanted to read the question in its entirety. I'm not going to say who the question's from, but the reading the question in the whole context is going to help me kind of explain this a little better. So the question reads, hey, Matt, I really struggle with assigning meaning to intrusive thoughts and negative feelings. I'm fairly confident that I can do most exposures, but I gain no confidence or relief because I feel like a failure / bad for even having the intrusive thoughts or the negative emotions. I'm sure there's a mental compulsion there and that I'm not catching. 100% there is, right? We're going to talk about that. And then they follow up with saying, any tips on how to address this? It's reached a point where I'm always checking to see if I am thinking or feeling right, because if I'm not, that means something's seriously wrong with me. Okay, so a lot to unpack here, and an amazing question to this person. So first off, let's go ahead and talk about, really understanding the idea of assigning meaning is in many ways the first compulsion that we're doing. Because when you are having intrusive thoughts fly in your mind, or you're having anxious feelings surface in your body, the only thing that you need to really do is observe it, right? It's just happening. And again, not gaining, not resisting what presently is happening, right? And when I say you, this is the idea of consciousness that I talk deeper about in the book, and that we go really deep into in Taking Back Control. And I really believe that in order to, really have the level of recovery that you want, there has to be a shift in consciousness. You have to understand consciousness. You have to understand the mind as something you observe, this feeling, something that you observe, something that is different than you, right? And one of the ways we know that it's different than you is because they're constantly changing, right? So that in and of itself is evidence that you're the consistent awareness, right? So moving deeper into the question, so I feel like a failure or bad person for even having the intrusive thoughts or negative emotions. Okay, so we have this experience, we judge them as bad, and then we go ahead and judge, in this case, judge ourselves as being bad for having them, even though they're completely involuntary. Okay, that would be like having a cramp in your leg happen and you thinking that you're a bad person for having a cramp. It's like, it's obviously not helpful in any way, but in many ways it's kind of silly, that to do that, because it's not like you're choosing to have these experiences. In fact, you're resisting them, and resisting them is causing them to continue. So that would be the first thing right there, is just judging the events themselves as bad, right? As the idea of like, these thoughts, these feelings are bad and I'm only supposed to feel good. Like, that is a total belief structure right there, right? And because you're operating from that belief structure, any intrusive thought that you experience or any anxious feeling that you have, you're going to perceive it to be bad, not because it's bad, but because you believe that you're only supposed to have certain thoughts and certain feelings. And in that belief can develop all sorts of ways, right? in the States and in the United States, and I believe New Zealand, right? Pharmaceutical companies are able to advertise directly to consumers. And that's the only two countries that I believe in the world where that can happen. And what's interesting about that is that if you're told that feeling bad means that you are feeling quote unquote bad, whatever that means, like a low energy state, an anxious energy state, a depressed energy state. If you're taught to believe that that's a pathology, it's a disease, that something's wrong with you if you don't feel happy all the time, well, then you're going to begin to judge that feeling as bad, right? And we receive programming like this all the time in commercials and things like that. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe that they're not supposed to stay in these kind of energy states in a chronic state, but the paradox is because we're unwilling to feel these feelings and we resist them so heavily, that actually causes them to perpetuate a lot longer than they need to, in my experience. So the first mental compulsion there, right, or mental safety behavior, is that idea of just the judgment and the whole belief operation there that's underneath it. And in the idea if there's a mental compulsion there or not, I mean, like it says it right in the question, I am always checking to see if I'm thinking or feeling, and if what I'm thinking and feeling is right, because if I'm not, it means something's seriously wrong with me. So on this question, this idea of mental checking is the behavior, right? That, like, so important that we understand that mental safety behaviors are in my opinion, one of the things that keep most people stuck in OCD and anxiety. And the reason is because they're the same exact thing as doing physical safety behaviors. They're just harder for people to see and be aware that they're doing. So if you're mentally scanning, right? So one of the coaches on my team, has said this phrase recently, and I really liked it. But it's like, she talked about, like, if your eyeballs are going inside, right, and scanning your body or scanning your mind, right? Like, I know your eyeballs aren't literally going inside, but essentially you're bringing your awareness into your mind to see if the thoughts are there, into your body to see if the feelings are there. That act is the checking, right? And when you're checking for something, you're already operating under the implication to your nervous system and brain that thing you're checking for is bad. Therefore, if you find the presence of it, you're going to react to it, right? Because you naturally scan for threats when you're in fight or flight, right? When your fight or flight nervous system is activated, you naturally are scanning for threats. So if you're scanning, what kind of message are you sending to your brain and nervous system? Well, these thoughts are dangerous. These feelings are dangerous. They're bad. And then you coupled in the belief structure there, where if I have this, it means that something's seriously wrong with me. Where I would argue the exact opposite. I would absolutely argue the exact opposite. Nothing's wrong with you. The idea that you think this means something wrong with you is what causes you to react, your nervous system to fire off with a fight or flight response. And then as the more you engage in safety behaviors, it keeps you in yellow, right? Or it keeps your nervous system in fight or flight. And the more you do that, the paradox is that creates disorder in your life, right? It's actually not the symptoms, the anxious feelings or the intrusive thoughts it's the indication of the disorder. It's your resistance to them and the fact that you spend so much time trying to get rid of these normal experiences that creates disorder in your life. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I'm hoping I'm explaining that the paradox of all of that, because that's, even when you're measuring someone, quote unquote, diagnosing someone with an anxiety disorder, a lot of times what you're measuring is the amount of time they're engaging in behaviors to try to get rid of the symptoms. So it's not the presence of symptoms that indicate the disorder, because the reality is intrusive thoughts are a normal experience. Thoughts pop in our head all day, the anxious feelings, all sorts of feelings, are normal human experiences. When we throw the label of abnormal on them through a belief structure that, and we talk beliefs, that's like really a big foundational part of TBC, right? Is unlearning the concept of belief and our stories that we're operating from, and actually starting to rewrite and build healthier stories that then we build upon. And why that is so powerful. Because because think about it. If I told you to stop mental checking, but if you have this belief structure in there that is I'm broken or something seriously wrong with me if I have these thoughts, well, it doesn't make sense for you to stop mental checking if you believe that. Right. So just telling people to do ERP and do exposures and don't do compulsions, don't do safety behaviors, and ignore these unhealthy belief structures that are down there. Which these stories that you just essentially keep telling yourself, or these stories that you just assume to be true. Hopefully you see how that's going to be way more challenging than if we address the belief structures as well. And that's part of why I wanted to do this episode on this question. I mean, it's an amazing question. I know so many people out that listen to the show are going to be able to relate to this question. And so to answer the question, when it comes to what were the compulsions and all of that, well, first, the judging and assessment of these things are bad. That's a compulsion. That's a behavior. You choose to label them as bad. Then that causes a reaction in the body. And then the mental checking is the big one that you mentioned. And then the real things, though, that I would work at addressing are the narratives or the beliefs, the consistent assumptions, if you will, that something's terribly wrong with you because you have these experiences, and that, that these experiences are bad. And even the idea that like I can do exposures, but I feel like I'm not gaining confidence or relief. It's not actually the point of an exposure. So I want to kind of clarify that too. The point of an exposure is to show your nervous system that you're actually safe. So if I have someone, let's say, who is agoraphobic and can't leave and doesn't believe they can leave their house, right? An exposure would be, because they might think, well, I'm going to have a panic attack and I'm going to freak out and the world's going to end, right? Some kind of story like that. And I'm not in any way mocking that. I mean, like I've had many people that have that exact story. Like I don't want to leave my house because I'm afraid I might have a panic attack. So what we do is we like, okay, well, let's just like step to the driveway. Let's just walk to the driveway and let's see what happens, right? What we're doing is we're showing their nervous system currently believes the driveway is dangerous because of the panic attack and whatnot. So what we're doing is we're disconfirming the threat, if you will, with exposure. We're saying like, is this really threatening? Let's walk out to the driveway and let's see what happens. Now, a lot of times it might mean that I walk with them. I might even have to hold their hand, or they might need to hold on. Okay, that's okay. Hold on to my arm. That's okay. You hold on to your partner's arm. It's like, it's okay, but like we get their physical feet and body on the driveway. And it's like that exposure of standing on the driveway is challenging the nervous system to say, hey, look, is this really threatening? And even if they start to feel anxiety, if they stand there long enough, the nervous system regulates and the threat is disconfirmed. So exposure is not necessarily about making you feel better as much as it's about disconfirming threats to the nervous system. And through that process, neuroplasticity happens in the rewiring of the brain. But the only way that happens is if we're doing no safety behaviors. And that's why I wanted to address this question so much, because what most people do is they do an exposure and then they mental check, they ruminate, they analyze, right? They do all these mental safety behaviors. And that actually is not doing an exposure. That's doing an exposure and doing a bunch of compulsions that are reinforcing the idea that you're in danger. And then they say, well, this doesn't work for me. Well, yes, it does. It didn't work because you didn't do it correctly, right? That's why in the book, especially, I talk about like the first thing we got to do is get rid of the mental behaviors. I truly believe most people do this completely backwards. They try these physical exposures that are very intense. And what really needs to happen is we need to, to be successful, we need to successfully just eliminate all your behaviors first. And that means even being aware of the behaviors you're doing and then implementing a solution like the AAA response. That's like a foundation. And then we do exposures on top of that, right? But because we need to make sure we're not doing any behaviors. So hopefully this was helpful. And again, great question to the person who wrote this. And I know went on a bit of a tangent, a couple times, but there was so much to unpack in this question that I was like, oh, this will be, I think, very beneficial, not only for the person who wrote it, but to all those listening, because it's really about identifying all the mental safety behaviors you do, right? And really seeing how those are playing in your life to make sure that you're removing those to really help you be successful on this journey. So thank you so much for hanging out today on this episode. I hope it was helpful. And with that said, please check out the resources in the notes. And if you want to submit a question at all for a future episode, feel free to do so down in the notes as well. And then we will see you on the next episode. So hope you guys have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey there, hope you enjoyed that recent video. We really would appreciate your support real quick if you could like and subscribe to our channel. And if you're looking for help with OCD and anxiety, please check out the links below or visit restoredminds.com, as we'd be happy to help you on your journey. Thanks so much.